How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts! My soul longs, indeed it faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. In season 1 of the Dwelling Place podcast, this longing took me on a 6-month journey around the UK to dwell with a variety of intentional Christian communities, sharing interviews with community members, leaders, and founders along the way. In this second season of the Dwelling Place podcast, I invite you to join me in the US as I occasionally visit intentional Christian communities and share community-related interviews in the midst of my seminary education. In sharing these conversations, exploring the blessings, challenges, and wisdom of intentional Christian communal living, I hope to share glimpses of the transforming presence of the living God and inspire how it is we might be called to contribute to making God's kingdom manifest on earth, enabling people, God's beloved, to experience God's loving dwelling place.
So my name's Mark Colville, and I live here at the Amistad Catholic Worker House in New Haven, Connecticut. And I've been part of this community, this intentional community here for over 30 years. We started with 4 adults and 2 children here back in 1994, and we gathered here around the principles of the Catholic Worker movement, which is folks may be familiar with. Movement that started in the early 1930s here in the U.S. during the Depression, and it's kind of it's a kind of a whole network of houses of hospitality across the country here, and again, people, these communities are gathered around principles of nonviolence, both as a personal lifestyle and a method for social change, beginning in the neighborhood, beginning on the block. What a traditional notion in the churches coming out of the New Testament of voluntary poverty, which is is trying to on some level imitate the early Christian communities as they're described in the Book of Acts, where resources are pooled and people commit to living simply and sharing, kind of a radical sharing, I would call it, is what we try to do. We try to live, well, actually, for us, we try to live a lifestyle here that resembles that of our neighbors, and actually, included in that is that Catholic worker communities are intentionally, for the most part, they intentionally refuse nonprofit status. Okay, and part of the reason for that is that we don't think that we deserve any special status or advantage before the government for doing simply doing the works that our faith and conscience call us to do. That shouldn't set us on some other level. In fact, even living in the neighborhood is how we learned how to be people of hospitality. Okay, I would say that and this may be unlike some other Catholic worker houses that appear in different places. Typically, people show up with an idea. They show up not only with the commitment to these principles, but they show up with an idea of how they're going to live. Like, we're going to start a soup kitchen or whatever we're going to do, right? So we came here in 1994 without that. We decided that we were not going to come in with our own plan, but that we would spend the first period of time just being neighbors. And it kind of relates to some of the gospel stories. Here's a little kind of reflection that I've been sort of riffing on for the past several couple of decades actually, and that is that, you know, in the calling of the first disciples, as the story goes in the first chapters of John, there's an incident there where they see Jesus walking by, and he doesn't say follow me, they just start following him, and he notices that, and he turns around and he says, what do you seek? What are you looking for? And you know the story. He says, they say, where are you, teacher, where are you staying? Is what they say, right? And so I was always kind of interested in that, because, you know, just before that, they have the encounter with John the Baptist, right? And, you know, of course, and John the Baptist asked the same question, right? And so, but when you think about that, of course, in the Gospels, whenever Jesus asks a question, you know, he's asking me, he's asking the reader as well. You know, what are you looking for, right? And so they say, where are you staying? You know, as opposed to with John the Baptist, it was like they asked him, what should we do? What should we believe? You know, and basically that was the basic question: what would you have us do, right? But if you were there, you know, and Jesus turned around and asked you that question, you know, what would you say? You know, why wouldn't you say, well, what should I believe, or what should I do, or what do you believe? You know, that stuff. They say, where are you staying? And so to me, that's an indication of what we should be about if we're trying to be people of the way, you know, that evangelization begins not with preaching or teaching or, you know, bringing something that you don't have, and I'm convinced that you need it. I mean, isn't that the model that we typically pursue? Evangelization, the starting point of evangelization is hospitality. Okay. And as that story wraps up, so they went and they saw where he was staying, and they stayed with him the rest of the day. That's where everything started, was when they gathered at a table and they stayed with each other for the day. So to us, that's always been the starting point of social change. Again, beginning in the neighborhood is a common table around which people can gather without status, without distinction, and everybody welcome, and everybody sharing, bringing what they have to the table. That's the basic model of community that we're trying to follow. And I think, you know, part of the the Catholic worker movement, part of the value of that has been that it offers not only a place where we can figure out how to do that together, but then it also becomes a place, and I think maybe the best, if we want to measure success here at Amistad, I would say the most successful thing we've done is that we've created a space here where people can come and find something that they can do. You know, in other words, the table now is a place where people come to offer their gifts. You know, for example, we're into a lot of resistance now locally. Not only are we in deep solidarity with the victims of the genocide in Palestine and all of that, and we're very much intersecting, movements here locally, but we have been where we have been going is in the way of trying to resist the criminalization of homelessness here on the local level, and so yeah, that's why I say, you know, we sort of use hospitality as a method of nonviolent direct action is what we do. I could get into some of how the work has sort of changed over 30 years, but I would say that, again, we started in 1994, literally we spent the summer, we came in June, we spent the rest of the summer just sweeping the front sidewalk in the morning, and then, of course, the mothers and their children would be coming by, especially as schools started, they'd be walking their kids to school, and a couple of different things. People found out that we had a public liturgy where we just kind of talked about the principles of the Catholic worker, and that we were going to start living them now. And people started coming out of the woodwork, bringing us, stuff to give away in the neighborhood, particularly. Started with bagels and donuts. So we just started setting up on the front sidewalk with that, and using it as a way to chat with people. And things have grown from there. I would say our ministry, if you want to call it that, has been characterized since then by kind of following where the neighborhood has led us. And as organizers, Luce and I both got my wife, Luce Caterino. She and I met in the South Bronx in the mid 1980s. We were married in 1990 there, but we met. When we met, we were both engaged in community organizing. Okay, I was an organizer, had just been trained. I was working in 10 or 12 different neighborhoods in the South Bronx, and we met. She was one of the local leaders. Neighborhood leaders that we had the privilege of working with and training and stuff. So she and I I mentioned that because, we come to the Catholic worker movement with these principles I've been talking about, nonviolence and works of mercy and the voluntary poverty, pooling of resources and all. But Lisa and I came to this also with this, I say we didn't have a plan for what we were going to do in the neighborhood, but we did have a posture with which we approached the neighborhood is one of community organizers. And I would say that, the responsibilities that we take on when we do organizing are they're kind of centered on building community and building leadership, and particularly in the context. Now we're doing some intensive organizing with unhoused people who are experiencing homelessness now, and that presents lots and lots of challenges. But that's what we're about. It's and part of what we're really trying to encourage through that is we've come to understand that part and parcel of the criminalization of homelessness is that it disempowers people. It takes their power away to the point where, in a typical city like ours, the only way people who are unhoused get service here is if they approach the city as a victim. Okay, you have to approach them powerlessly, with hands open, and then they get to manage your whole life. Okay, so again, when I say that we have gone where the neighborhood has led us, well, in our neighborhood, the reality is there's two neighborhoods in this city, the Hill, which is where we live, and Fairhaven. Those are two neighborhoods where I would say unhoused people are tolerated, okay? Because what we have here in the United States is a shelter system that has become the permanent solution to homelessness for the system here is the whole shelter system. What we've come to understand about the shelter system here, and we've finally gotten it through our thick heads, that it's run according to a criminal justice model. Okay, when you walk into a shelter here in New Haven, certainly, and pretty much everywhere else in the United States, first thing they do is pat you down. And then in order to get a bed for the night, when I say for the night, you got to be there by 4 here. And you're supposed to be ejected at 7 a.m. Typically, they do it here at 6:30 for the convenience of the staff. Okay. So you get patted down. And then in order to get a bed for the night, you got to give up your property, your privacy, your agency, your spouse, your pet, your job if it doesn't fit into the schedule of the shelter. Essentially, everything you would give up when you walk into a jail, you give up in order, to walk into a shelter, okay, and get a bed for the night And then again, there's a daily eviction. All right. And so, but as a homeowner and a member of the neighborhood here, again, when the folks are sent out every morning, they basically have this unspoken mandate to scatter and disappear. Okay. If they show up, they usually are hassled, evicted, or arrested. Okay. If you walk around this city with more than one book bag, for instance, you get profiled as unhoused. Okay. And let's say if you're a Yale student and you're walking across the green and you're eating a banana, for example, and you throw the peel on the ground, I think you're okay. But if you're carrying 2 book bags and you don't look like you've had a shower, that's a perfect opportunity for a cop to roll up on you. And you know what happens next, okay? So, and especially people of color and all that. So, anyway, we, somewhere along the line, I'll just tell you, like, we've had a significant shift here in our community in terms of our day-to-day commitments. And that started, it really started about 11 years ago now. Back in 2013 is when we really started to kind of look at the water that we were swimming in, let's say, as fish who are committed to the daily practice of the works of mercy. So, and what spurred that was, again, we had been involved in quite a bit of organizing on the local level, and a lot of that had to do with trying to make safe spaces in the midst of the drug trade that goes on in the neighborhood and the violence that comes with that. That we had for a couple of decades had been sort of carving out a space in the neighborhood where families and children would be respected, and so we managed to kind of, with the way the situation is here in our cities, you can move it around, but you can't necessarily, unless they legalize it, it's always going to be a total mess and a violent mess, black market, all that stuff. So about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, 2013, the UN, people may know this, that the UN Committees on Racial Discrimination and Homelessness did a study of US cities nationwide, particularly holding up the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights to the ways in which we deliver services, particularly to homeless, unhoused people. And as I said, the whole presenting as a victim is essential in order to access services here. Anyway, that study came out in late in 2013, and we read it, and we were like, not only we need to take this seriously, we need to take it personally. Okay, because what they were saying was exactly what I'm telling you. It's like that there are cities nationwide here typical cities have a plethora of local laws, beginning with zoning laws that are really racist, but they intentionally criminalize homelessness. Okay, and of course that's what we run into here whenever we try to help people build their own homes. Anyway, and the study, it listed a bunch of typical laws that we have in our cities, all of which we have in New Haven, that criminalize homelessness. And sort of the maybe the crown jewel of those laws is this again, this is local zoning stuff that says that prevents people from taking refuge on public land that's not being used when they have not been provided housing by the government. So that's what the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights says about my city. Okay, that people who are not provided with an apartment tonight have a right to take refuge somewhere. Okay, our city has never recognized that right. Okay, which is why people sleep under bridges, on sidewalks, in train stations, and they're constantly getting brutalized by police and evicted. Even in the cold, we have a cold weather emergency right now as we speak. It's 11 degrees outside at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's going to be like 7 degrees. I'm talking Fahrenheit here, sorry. Yeah, so so that's what, they kind of flagged that as, that's sort of the central part, that people in our city do not have a legally sanctioned place to exist outside of a shelter tonight. Okay, that's the reality. And of course, as I said, the shelters are run according to a criminal justice model. So when we sort of started to analyze this stuff back then, as I said, we needed to take this personally. Like we have, in the Catholic Worker, we're very much a New Testament based community. And what I mean by that is that we're trying to kind of imitate Christ as a collective, and in many ways taking guidance from how that seems to be lived out in the New Testament. The early Christian communities, etc. We try to hold to the values that they were about. So we immediately thought, and the Catholic Worker, for anybody who's familiar with the Catholic Worker movement, we have this rich, very blessed and beautiful tradition of opening up our own spaces. Part of the whole mission of the Catholic Worker is to say we don't need the church to do this work. Okay, we don't need the social service agency, and we certainly don't need the government to do the work that our faith and conscience is inviting us to do. And so that's been a sort of the charism of the Catholic Worker. Is like, yeah, we don't have to create an agency. We don't need an institution. We're anarchists, in the real, the real true sense of that. We do the right thing. We try to do the right thing together because it's the right thing, not because there's law or something outside that's obliging us to do it. We don't approach faith as again, as an obligation. It's an invitation, beginning again with the call of the first disciples. Okay, so again, this was 2013. So what do we do? And by the way, I should mention that the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights, 1948, right? And that was post-World War II, where you had literally millions of people across Europe, particularly, but millions and millions of economic refugees and war refugees. What's the difference between 1948 and now? Those refugees were mostly white. Okay, and so it's not surprising to me that in 1948, in that context, that the Western white world became, as a collective, became prominent in the world's conscience. That people need a legally sanctioned place to exist. Okay, and so they immediately, there were obviously refugee camps and such all over the, to recover from all that. Okay, and I often think, by the way, in terms of a refugee camp, I always imagine how much better unhoused people's lives would be here in New Haven if they had the status of refugee. Okay, because when we're talking about the shelter system, right? Think if there was a natural disaster where you live and everybody in your town had to, take refuge somewhere, and all the homes were, needed to be rebuilt and all that. Okay, so you and your family would go to a refugee camp, and it would be individual units in which families live privately, surrounding a central facility where everybody can access bathroom, shower, toilet, cooking, laundry, all the things that we all need in a regular house. That would be the model, right? And yet, when people are unhoused here because they can't afford the rent, the apartments here, and I've recently heard a few statistics about New Haven that first of all, it's the fourth worst rental market in the entire country in terms of affordability. Okay, our mayor here has spent the last several months, including right through the winter, cutting the tape on luxury apartment buildings right downtown, right where people are sleeping in the alleys. Okay, and those people are being brutalized and evicted and criminalized on a nightly basis, and they're throwing 24 people out of the train station every night who are taking refuge there, which is just a short walk from these luxury apartments, right? So that's the reality that we are living in here. So we again in 2013 we saw this, and then the following summer we started organizing around it. We demanded that the city designate a one or more parcels of land on which people could set up tents or whatever, create their own homes without being criminalized or arrested by the police. And again, we decided that we wanted our city to come into compliance with the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And interestingly, right now, what's today? Tuesday. Yesterday we celebrated the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday here, the federal holiday, right? Why did I mention? My brain is getting. Oh yeah. So one of the things that I actually gave a talk on this on Friday to a high school. That one of the things that historically in the civil rights movement here in the 50s and 60s, and right up until Martin Luther King's assassination, there came a point. Actually, it was shortly before King's death. There came a point where the leaders of the different civil rights organizations got together and decided that that they had been, in terms of the Jim Crow laws, the laws that exclude and that entrench and institutionalize racism here in this country, that those laws were so draconian, and it was like beating your head against a legal wall. And they had been at it for so many years trying to get the laws changed that at some point they decided that they needed to go to the UN, okay, and the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights. There was an actual time where they went before the UN and they made a case against the United States for racism, for structural, institutionalized racism. Okay, and so we decided back in 2013 that if we try to get zoning approval, to set up tents somewhere, it'll never happen. So we decided that we needed to lean on, international law is binding and superseding law in all courts in the United States. That comes from the U.S. Constitution. Okay, any international law or body of law that we enter into by congressional treaty here becomes binding and superseding law. Okay, and so even from a legal perspective, we said we're going to start leaning on that because we are right. And so what happened was this: in 2014, during the summer, we had a couple of student organizers that came and joined us from Yale, from the Div School actually, and we spent the summer taking over little pieces of land, lots in our own neighborhood. And what we would typically do is we would march from here, from our house of hospitality, Amistad, and we'd march over to this place, whatever designated place we had, and then we'd bring tents and we'd knock on all the doors and the neighbors and explain to them what we were doing and why. And almost without exception, they would be immediately down with it. And then we would set up these little tent cities, and they immediately would become like within a couple of hours, they would become centers of mutual aid, where not only the neighbors would bring food to the hot food to the people, but then people started bringing stuff and exchanging stuff. People in the neighborhood. So it immediately became these beautiful little experiences in the neighborhood of mutual aid, right? before we called it that. Anyway, but what was happening was the city would shut it down as soon as they found out about it. So typically, like, they wouldn't last more than 48 hours. And then on a side note, this second time we did this, 4 of us were arrested for refusing to leave, charged with trespass, and acquitted in court. We were found not guilty in court because the judge agreed with us that against the city that this was a perfectly legitimate use of public space given the emergency of homelessness. Okay, so unfortunately, we didn't have the power, we didn't have the people power then to sustain a movement around this. But that changed about 10 years later, or a little less than that, during when COVID started, right? We had been sort of pushing this agenda, but again, not in a very organized way. Anyway, I could get into that if you want, or maybe you want to talk more about community life and stuff.
Yeah, because of time, let's pivot to community life.
Okay.
Just as a prompt, you said you started off giving out, sweeping your sidewalk and then giving out bagels and donuts. And I'm also interested in kind of what a day or a week in the life of the Amistad Catholic Worker is now. And then if you want to, like, what happened in between.
Yeah, well, let's put it this way. So, again, when all that stuff I'm explaining about, about the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights and all, we came to understand that it wasn't enough anymore just for us to open as much space as possible in our own, on our own property. Okay, and we had been very effective at this voluntary poverty thing in terms of making everything available to the community. So we had been at that for quite a while, but we came to understand back then, about 10 years ago now, that that in order to really practice hospitality in this context, you have to go out to where people are criminalized. They're pushed to the margins, and then they don't have the status of personhood even. Okay, and they're criminalized for doing what you and I normally do. We take refuge somewhere. Okay, and so we decided that that's what hospitality has to be now. Okay, so what we have now is in response to the city's incessant bulldozing of tent encampments, people have been sleeping in tents in this city essentially since the Reagan administration, when the federal government abdicated its responsibility to house its own people. That's when homelessness started. Modern homelessness started in this country. And people have been camping out ever since, and they've been criminalized for it. So what we did, the city was incessantly destroying encampments and people's homes, and typically all of their property, even medications. People were dying and still are from these evictions because of the disorientation involved in being on the street. We've had several incidents of people dying from this. We decided in response to that, and in our failure over the previous 10 years or so to get the city to comply with the UN Universal Declaration on Human Rights, we decided to declare our own backyard to be public land. Okay, and then we decided to start inviting all of the victims of these encampment sweeps to come bring their tent and bring it to our backyard. And we started a community in the backyard of unhoused, formerly unhoused people. Because what we did was we kind of discovered a very simple way of removing people from the status of homelessness. And the very simple way is you give them a piece of land. Okay. We said, when people came to the backyard, we said, we're not giving you a tent. We'll give you a tent if you need one, but we're not giving you a tent. We're giving you a piece of land. Where you put your tent down is your land. And that automatically restores you to the status of neighbor. Okay. And neighbors have responsibilities to each other as well as privileges, And of course, so what we were trying to do with that was, it was both a work of mercy in an emergency, right? But it was also what we were also trying to do, and we're still trying to do with this, is to set up a model of what a supported encampment could look like. Okay, as I said, they immediately become centers of mutual aid. Okay, you provide a little electricity, a little running water, a little heat, you know, a little coolness in the summertime, you know, and you leave people alone and let them create a life together. You know, let them be who they need to be as individuals, and let them figure out who they want to be together. Okay, this is a model that we set up in the backyard, and I'll tell you, as a community, you know, person who's been living in these intentional communities for all of my adult life, essentially, this created a personal crisis for me as a Christian. Okay, whereas I would say I'm somebody that's trying to be a Christian. I'm a Catholic trying to be a Christian. Anyway, so as you might imagine, right, the first night that we did this, it was like I'm immediately locating myself in the story of Lazarus and the rich man. You may be familiar with that from, you know, from Jesus's parables, right? That they're, you know, the rich man is living in a house, and he literally has to step over Lazarus to get outside, right? And so that's kind of the model that we had set up here originally. It was like, yeah, I mean, it's the winter, you know, there are empty rooms in this house where we could pile people up if we wanted to, but we're trying to start a community of unhoused people who can live autonomously in decriminalized spaces. Okay, but it took a real shift in me, you know, as a person, again, engaged in community life all these years, you know, that to take myself out of that, you know, out of that primary status as helper, as, you know, the virtuous person, you know. One of the things that we've always measured, you know, in terms of success here at our house, one of the ways that I've always measured our success as a community is when people come in, like volunteers or people who've never been there before, come in and they can't figure out who's there because they're hungry, you know, and who's there because they, you know, they want to be, you know, they want to be like Jesus or something, you know. When people get confused about that, I think we're getting somewhere. Okay, so that's what we got now. We have a backyard, and you know, without getting too much into it, a whole collective has sprung up around supporting the backyard. We came to call it, and actually, again, we've committed to making this a community that's distinct from Amistad. Okay, we have our own intentional community here, but we've literally at this point given the house of hospitality and the backyard over to this project. Okay, and so we have exactly what I was telling you about refugee camps, right? We have dwellings surrounding or in the backyard of the house of hospitality. People walk about 10 feet to get in and access the services available. As I said, a community has sprung up, a community of support has sprung up around this. The name of the place is, the backyard community is called the Rosette Neighborhood Village. We live on Rosette Street. We got a little rosette as a symbol. And so the Rosette Village community, and then we have, again, this organization called the Rosette Neighborhood Village Collective, which is now, they're actually becoming a nonprofit organization here. And Amistad, actually, at this point, Amistad is essentially back to being my wife and I. We don't have, at this point, we don't have more intentional community members that live here. But Luce and I have moved next door to an apartment on the first floor of the house next door, so we could free up space over there. So yeah, and you know, in terms of intentional community, you know, we started here. We were young, and we had We had two very young children, age 4 and 2. Okay, now I'm going to be 64 this year, and our children are all grown. What a blessing! They all actually live nearby. But one of the challenges, in terms of, we're talking about intentional community, and people who commit to that over the long haul, as Luce and I are finding out now, one of the challenges is, how do you, especially as you transition into elder status, let's say, how do you begin to let go? How do you kind of give up not only your space, but your authority? How do you let Amistad then become what it's being invited to become going forward? If anything, I think a good philosophy that I've carried with me about community life and about our organizations, our grassroots organizations, is something that Gandhi reflected on at one point. And I've never been able to find this passage again, but he talked about that our communities, our neighborhood-based communities, our small organizations, they're like scaffolding, right? Even our social service agencies can be that way. We're like scaffolding. We're trying to, and if you want to use a New Testament, image for this, talk about the kingdom of God. And really, the whole Bible has a common thread going from the Hebrew scriptures right through the New Testament. What's everybody looking for? They're looking for a dwelling place. Where then shall we go? Okay, that's a question that absolutely rings through all of the generations covered in the scriptures, right? Where then shall we go? A dwelling place. And Jesus uses the in my Father's house there's many mansions, right? Okay, so to try to articulate this in our community lives is what we are trying to do. But again, as people moving into elder status, it's like, and we've watched other communities just kind of, hunker down as you're getting older. We've always done it this way. Let's keep doing it this way. No, this is totally against what I'm. And I just, my wife and I, first of all, we actually kind of not only love each other, but we kind of like each other, and we sort of want to. We want to know each other, apart from our identity as Amistad Catholic Worker members, and that one of the challenges of living a family life and a committed relationship like this in the context of community is losing that. Okay, and you don't want to lose that. And how do you not lose each other in that process? And then as we get older, again, how do we pass this on? And as Gandhi said about the scaffolding thing, it was like, use the image of the kingdom of God, right? Well, we got our scaffolding over here and we're building it up over here, right? But, where we go wrong, both in our communities and in the social service industrial complex, where do we go wrong? We start building foundations around the scaffolding so that what becomes more important than the work we've been doing for 30 years is, how do we make Amistad survive into the next generation? Nah, that's not the question, okay? Because maybe it's not supposed to. I think, and I used to say this all the time because of our experience of community life at Amistad. I used to say that a healthy Christian community dies about every 3 years, okay? People stomp away, people, whatever, that life happens, okay? Christian communities, because we're involved in faith, resistance, and hospitality, to sustain that in this culture is extremely hard, okay? It's just the nature of how we are called or invited to live together as people of the way. It inevitably leads, as Bonhoeffer said, right? And on the personal level, Bonhoeffer said, when Jesus calls a person, he bids them come and die. Okay, I think it's the same for communities like ours. Like, we're living here since we made this shift into trying to defend people against criminalization. Well, we've been criminalized. Okay, well, like I said, we have this collective here. We've set up. They raised about almost $130,000 in about 10 months, and were able to construct 6 tiny homes to replace the tents in the backyard. So we have the 2 double units and 4 single ones. We've doubled up all of them. So we got about, we got 14 or 15 people living in the tiny homes, and then we have several tents back there as well. But this is what we've done. This is the community that's growing. And I guess the challenge, I would say, for Christian-based community is, at some point it becomes, how do I get out of the way? These people don't need. How do I get out of the way and let people be who they're being invited to be? And the collective, if the community in the backyard depends on me showing up, then it's not a real community. And so we've been challenged over the past few years with this project to give up our power. And that it comes down to concrete things like give up the keys to the pantry. Let them distribute the resources. So it's a real challenge for us, but it has its joys.
Yeah, and we've only got 5 to 10 minutes left, and so okay. I have kind of 2 main questions. One around the daily and weekly rhythms of life at the Amistad Catholic Worker, and the other being around whether you're engaged in long-term support or helping people who've are living in the backyard, helping them onto next steps, if that is what they desire, or how that works in terms of
excellent
those are like the 2 outstanding questions I have.
It brings in a lot of details for us. It's like and that's we get that question a lot in terms of how long do you let people stay and stuff like that. Well, we don't have a rule about that. Our community is in the backyard is small enough where we can take people as individuals, and we don't have to make a blanket rule for everybody. So, and that's what we do. We try to do an evaluation process with folks personally every 3 months or so, and kind of decide what they need. But one of the challenges that comes up, particularly with previously chronically homeless people, and particularly those who have addictions, is that they want to use the place, long term. They want to use the place as a place where they can continue to to be addicts, which, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, except for the fact that our space is limited. It's not the purpose for which we set this up. And again, we're trying to set up a model that the city's going to follow. Okay. And so it's kind of a dance that we do with people, and I'll be honest, like at this point, we have several folks who have lived in the backyard now for a couple of years. And, again, we're taking this individually, but with some of these people, it's becoming obvious that we're sort of enabling them to kind of go down a rabbit hole personally. And we don't want to be, we don't want this place to be a trigger for people to go deeper into the stuff that they're trying to get out of, And so, so that becomes sort of the challenge. In terms of daily practice here, again, this commitment to resisting the criminalization of homelessness has changed our daily life. Okay, first of all, we have set up this community in the backyard. We've turned over the kitchen at Amistad to them. Okay, we still use it to do we do a lot of other efforts, which I'll talk about. But we try to give the people in the backyard autonomy. We also oblige them when we don't charge anybody rent. We are talking, folks in the community there are talking about everybody making a monthly or a weekly donation to the upkeep or the electricity, particularly because we're running out of money. But we don't have an obligation for that. But what we do, what we do ask people to commit to who live in the backyard are two things. First of all, that Amistad and that land that they're occupying has always been a place of hospitality. So people that live there have to agree to practice that. And they can figure out together, how to do that, on what level to do it, how much of a commitment to make, but we have an outward focus. Okay. And what was the second thing?
So it was around kind of, long-term support, and then rhythms of life at the Amistad.
Yeah. So what that means is they're committed to they make breakfast every morning for the neighborhood. Anybody can come in. People come in an emergency basis at night who have no place to go. They can find safe shelter here, and particularly during these cold times. We have an inside room with a table, and typically last night, as I said, it was 11 degrees last night, and we had about a dozen people sleeping in there on the floor, but so the residents, the permanent residents in the backyard have a responsibility to make all that work. And it's a challenge. Okay. Now, the other thing that we do, and so I live next door. I should mention that this house that I live in next door was purchased by my son-in-law and daughter about 3 years ago. In fact, my son-in-law, Jacob, he's a real estate professional, and as an organizer, I go as I've told Jacob, over the 30 years, we've probably had dozens of real estate professionals come to the Catholic Worker to serve soup. Have we ever had one as an ally? Now, Jacob is people live in the backyard with housing vouchers, and they can't use them because they get profiled. They can't find an apartment. Well, Jacob gets some apartments. Anyway, so they bought this house a few years ago. They gave us half of the backyard for our project. So there's tiny homes in their backyard too. And so I just walk out the back door here in the morning and go in the other back door at Amistad. And I usually check in about 8 o'clock and, make sure people have what they need for breakfast, and they make the meals. People come all day long bringing donations and even hot food and stuff. And it's really, as anybody who lives in a Catholic Worker house is accustomed to that. It can be a real challenge, especially when people don't let you know they're coming. So they're managing all of that on a daily basis. My wife, Luce, and I are kind of coming in and out of it, trying to, to be there, but be out of the way, that sort of thing. The other demand that we have, again, we have very few rules, but we ask them to govern themselves, and whatever rules they come up with as a collective by consensus, that we will help enforce those if we can. But we don't have a lot of rules, but one hard and fast rule for everybody living in the backyard, and even guests, is that we have a community meeting in the backyard every Tuesday morning. I just came from it. And if you can't commit yourself, I don't care if you have a job, health problems, I don't care. If you can't show up for that meeting, you need to find another place to live, because we know that communities die very quickly through lack of communication, because it leads to gossip, theft, anger, all that stuff. Okay, so we have a community meeting every week at Tuesday. And then the other thing that we're doing now, we over the past 3 years, particularly since COVID started, it's more than that now, we've been actively involved in nonviolent direct action to claim space for people out in the street. In other words, we're trying to get the legalized tenting in the city. The winters are extremely miserable here. What we did, now we have a new routine that we started in the fall. First of all, what we did was, in response to the mayor cutting the tape on all these luxury apartments, upwards of $3,500 a month, $2,100 a month for a efficiency one-room studio apartment. and you could throw a rock and hit tents where people are living in tents from there. Okay, so what we do now is we go out at night. In October, we decided to to invite the folks that were sleeping in the alleyways all over downtown and the area and on the green. We decided to start an encampment right on the central green downtown area, almost in front of City Hall. So we set up a bunch of tents. We immediately were threatened with arrest. So we took the tents down in order to hold the space. We camped there for about 6 weeks. When the weather started getting cold, they started opening these emergency warming centers, which they don't have enough funding to keep open now during the whole winter. But people started taking refuge in there. So what we did then was we decided to vacate that space. And now what we do is a couple nights a week, and we're trying to make it every night, but we don't have enough help yet, is we go out with a mobile unit. We have a couple of cars that we fill up with food and warm stuff, and we literally go out to find people. People are camping and they're going further into the woods, off the grid, because they're being more criminalized. It's amazing how this city is, they ramp up the evictions from tents when the weather gets cold. It's really sick. So we're going out and finding people. And of course, the people in the backyard are helping prepare those meals, and they're coming out with us. So we're building a sort of a community on the run here. And since we're able to give people formerly unhoused people, an established place to be, that they're now able to go out to find the people that don't have that, and to give direct help and service to them, and to try to build relationships with them. So that's the form of community that we're trying to, practice now. It's interesting to me that a lot of in the Catholic worker movement, people are kind of famous for let's start a Catholic worker house. So the first thing they do, you got to have a house, right? Well, we didn't have a house. We didn't start with a house. When we moved here, my friend David lived on the second floor in an apartment, and he decided to let us come because he wanted to help start the Catholic worker. So we literally lived in his apartment. The whole rest of the house was taken, and we started doing everything from the basement, So we have to take off our Western glasses here and start to approach community in a different way. It's not about a place or a house. It's about being neighbors with each other and living the way that we're being invited to, by the Gospels. So that's our approach.
And then it's 10 to 11. I'm just wondering about the number of people who live on the backyard, just to help people visualize what that.
Yeah, so it's a fluctuating population. At last count, again in the tiny homes, I believe we have 14 people, and then currently we have 2 or 3 tents back there. We did have adjacent to that space is a community garden space, which we don't have time to get into, but we've been taking care of this vacant lot at our own expense. It's a city-owned lot for 30 years almost. And so we decided to take the back section of that, which was being used for illegal dumping actually by some of the neighbors. We cleaned it up last summer and we set up a bunch of tents in there. So we had about 30 people all together. But unfortunately, just as the winter was setting in, we realized that that space was getting a little out of hand. People were coming in and not respecting the neighbors. So we had to downsize. We expect to move back into that space. So we have about 14 permanent residents now, and then again, a constant influx of people seeking refuge at night. And we have people who are, actually I should mention that, I shouldn't have even gone through this without mentioning this wonderful farm-based Catholic worker community called Ben in Casa, which kind of in many ways takes its inspiration from St. Catherine of Siena. Anyway, these are folks that and you might want to get in touch with them in terms of talking about community. I could put you in touch with Sean Gargamelli McCrate and his wife Karen, who started that about 5 years ago. And when we started doing this work in the backyard, they were like the first ones to get in touch with us, and they were very instrumental in everything that's been done back there. They have a farm; it's about 20-minute drive from here, and now they're actually employing people in the backyard. They're bringing folks out to work, day work on the farm, some pretty consistent work, and now they're running farmers markets in different locations here in the city. So they're actually, they're sort of Benincasa and us are sort of sister communities that are working on all this stuff together.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And then I also have a meeting at 11, but I was just whether just in terms of logistics, whether as a community you live off donations alone, or whether through your time in community you've been working a full-time job or a part-time job. I'm just wondering.
Yeah. So the way that worked out for us is, for the first, for 30 years, like first half of that, it was almost all donations, and we sort of had a commitment to full-time work here. About 10 or 15 years ago, Luce decided that she wanted to intentionally step back from some of the community stuff. She got a part-time job. It's actually, now she continues to do part-time work, and that's been helping with funding the daily stuff here. But it's also, again, it's a sort of a personal and mental health kind of, option for her to be out of the house and be doing some meaningful work. And almost always the work that she's doing relates directly to the neighborhood. It has to do with health, public health studies, based in the neighborhoods. So it's pretty cool. And in the Catholic Worker, we talk about healthcare and stuff like that. Well, we've cheated on the old. Catholic workers typically don't have insurance, so we do have health insurance through Luce's job. So you work those things out to, again, it's an invitation, right? Where and people want to say, are you a real Catholic worker? Who cares? We're trying to.
Well, I should probably. We both have meetings to get to.
Yeah.
But thank you so very much, Mark. Really.
Right. Well, when you talk to me, I ramble too much. So I hope there's something useful in there.
Very much so. Thank you so much, Mark.